The dangerous Democrat quest to remove Donald Trump from the ballots. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Have you been following the news about the Democrat-fueled attempt to take Donald Trump off the ballots? So when you go to vote for president, right, his name won't even be listed. And the argument is from these leftist groups bringing these cases, these charges, these allegations in court right now, as I speak, the case they're making is that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. And as such, under a specific clause in the Constitution, he has no right to run for higher political office in this country. So we must strip him of this right and make it so people can never even vote for him again. Wow. That is a very dangerous notion. And before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcasts. And after listening to today's episode, no doubt you are going to need faith to get through these trying times. You may also get Bold and Blunt, of course, at washingtontimes.com. where you can subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter. How? I'll tell you how. Go to the bottom of washingtontimes.com, find the newsletter section, click on it, find Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. That's me. Click on that, enter your email address, and boom, you will get in your email box Monday, Wednesday, Friday, delivered my newsletter, which contains the commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, as well as my Bold and Blunt podcast. But that is not all. You may also get Bold and Blunt at Real Life Network. That is the awesome, very awesome, yes, tremendously awesome. I can't speak highly enough of this outreach effort of Pastor Jack Hibbs out in California. His church has put together this news arm of the church to embolden you and educate you and warn you about all the going-ons in the world that counter biblical teachings. Arming yourself with biblical truths. You really do need it. And one more quick mention, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. So let's look at what's taking place with this leftist-inspired attempt to drum Donald Trump out of existence, right? Which is to say, drum Donald Trump along with an entire nation of Donald Trump supporters who believe in the America First principles out of existence. Judge overseeing case to remove Trump from ballot agrees to order banning, get this, banning threats and intimidation. This is a story just this week out of Jackson, Wyoming. The Colorado judge overseeing the lawsuit attempting to bar former President Donald Trump from the White House using a rare constitutional clause has issued an order prohibiting threats and intimidation regarding the case. September 23rd, published by, jhnewsandguide.com. There are more headlines out there saying the same thing. So what does that mean? That in itself is dangerous, right? Because what does that mean? Threats and intimidation. It's very open to interpretation. The Associated Press writes it this way. On September 25th, the Colorado judge overseeing the first significant lawsuit to bar former President Donald Trump from the state's 2024 presidential ballot issued a protective order prohibiting threats and intimidation in the case, saying the safety of those involved, including herself and her staff, was necessary as the groundbreaking litigation moves forward. I'm reading from AP. Okay, now here's a quote from District Judge Sarah B. Wallace I 100% understand everybody's concerns for the parties, the lawyers, and frankly, myself and my staff, based on what we've seen in other cases. She's not talking about violence from, say, Black Lives Matter or Antifa. No, she's talking about so-called violence and threats and intimidation from you and me and conservatives and Tea Party types and limited government types, those radicals, those terrorist types that the deep state intel want to root out in Catholic churches around the nation. True story. The order, AP writes, prohibits parties in the case from making threatening or intimidating statements. Well, what does that mean? What is a threatening or intimidating statement? Because what I consider a threatening statement may very well be not what you consider a threatening statement, and I'm pretty darn sure it's nothing like what the Democrats might consider a threatening statement, right? To Democrats, saying gay marriage is a sin, or even going beyond that and saying there is no such thing as gay marriage because marriage, as defined by God, is between a man and a woman, why, that's intimidating. That's threatening. That's a form of violence to some on the left, right? But to me, it's just a biblical truth. So when you look at Donald Trump's enemies, pretty much anything Donald Trump would say in his defense would no doubt come across in their minds, in their twisted, deranged, wicked minds, as a threat. Or at least they would be sure and spin it that way, right? If Donald Trump were to come out and say, for instance, I'm innocent of these charges. Oh, hold the phone. Donald Trump is inciting violence. That's intimidating. That's intimidation. That's very threatening. It was sought, AP wrote, by lawyers for the liberal group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. It's kind of interesting. Even AP notes that this is a liberal group. That's a little bit refreshing, right? Because for years and years in the media, there's been this little bias trick, right? To point out when groups are conservative or far right. Like when they talk about Judicial Watch, the far right conservative group, Judicial Watch. And meanwhile, they'll say things like the nonpartisan, nonprofit American Civil Liberties Union, right? So it's a little bit refreshing to have AP note that this group is a liberal group. All right, back to reading. It was sought by lawyers for yada yada Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which is seeking to disqualify Trump from the ballot over a rarely used Civil War era clause of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And what does that amendment say? What does that infrequently used clause say? Well, it bars anyone, reading again from AP, who swore an oath to the Constitution and then, quote, engaged in insurrection, end quote, against said Constitution from running for office. So when did Trump engage in insurrection? According to the left, according to the Democrats, according to this suit, right, being brought in court to boot him from the ballots, Trump engaged in insurrection because he was involved in speaking on January 6, 2021, right? The famous attack on the Capitol to halt, I'm reading from AP again, the congressional certification of the 2020 presidential election. Even though Donald Trump, remember, used the words like peacefully protest. But hey, we'll just leave that out because it doesn't meet the agenda. And look, one question here to wonder. When was it again that Trump was convicted of insurrection? Oh yeah, that's right, he hasn't. But never mind. This is Donald Trump. We don't need to go to court to convict him. We just need to sling something out in the media and unleash the forces, unleash the winds. How did Chuck Schumer put it? Unleash the winds or whatever of the angry anti-Donald Trump media. And who needs court? Who needs court when you have allegation and accusation and whisper and innuendo and, oh yes, a whole bunch of sheep, a whole bunch of non-thinking, bleeding sheep who follow the Democrat Party blindly and without question, right? Who needs conviction? Who needs conviction when you have Donald Trump? No such thing as a constitution when Donald Trump is involved. But the bigger question here, right? If the left gets away with this with Donald Trump, booting him off the ballot, what do you think is going to happen in the future? What do you think will happen with any conservative candidate in the future that the Democrats feel threatened or intimidated by and want to boot from the ballot? Well, I'm sure their new go-to, along with opening the borders and passing out driver's licenses to illegals who can then turn around and use those ID cards to vote. I'm sure aside from that, the go-to for Democrats will be that handy-dandy 14th Amendment. Once their lawyers get their claws into that and find a friendly court to go ahead and remove Trump's name from the ballot, don't think it won't happen again against the next candidate. Oh, can you say Ron DeSantis, right? Ron DeSantis, the guy that Republicans who don't like Donald Trump have been trying to elevate and say, Ron DeSantis is everything Donald Trump is without the baggage. Well, guess what? Donald Trump didn't have baggage either until he dared to be a conservative and he dared to put America first, right? Don't you think the same thing will happen with Ron DeSantis? If Ron DeSantis were to turn around, let's just say Ron DeSantis wasn't so far down in the polls that you didn't need a Hubble telescope to see him, right? Let's just say that his poll numbers get up and he somehow is neck and neck with Donald Trump. And let's just say that Ron DeSantis were to become the Republican nominee for president for 2024. Don't you think that the Democrats would drum up the same baggage about Ron DeSantis? Don't you think there would be Russian collusion with Ron DeSantis? Don't you think that there would be some sort of phone conversations and unconstitutional orders and some sort of corruption charges and so forth and so on and so forth and so on? Come on, let's think here. Donald Trump didn't have the baggage either. Donald Trump, remember, when he was not running for president, had many friends in the Democrat Party, right? A lot of Democrats, a lot of blacks, a lot of women like Donald Trump. It wasn't until he declared a run for the White House and called out the deep state and called out the open border people and called out China and said he wanted to put America first, that all of a sudden all this baggage came. And it really, the baggage really hit the fan once he entered the White House and actually started walking the walk of his campaign talk. That's where he really created the enemies. It's one thing to promise on the campaign trail. All politicians can understand that. But it's another thing to actually do what you promised. Few politicians do that. And few bureaucrats like that. They don't have patience for politicians who actually do what they say. So Trump Derangement Syndrome, alive, well, and headed down a very, very dangerous path. Removing him from ballots based on the 14th Amendment is despicable, dangerous, and of course, the soon-to-be Democrat Party tool. I have a guest today who has written about this very issue and who knows Donald Trump personally and professionally. And I have to say, he's a great columnist as well for the Washington Times. Mike McKenna, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is great to have you here.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Well, you wrote this very interesting opinion piece in the Washington Times, Summoning Violence, Why Using the 14th Amendment Against Trump is a Really Bad Idea. Of course, I agree with you, but could you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment allows the disqualification of people who had engaged in insurrection or given aid or comfort to the enemies of the United States. It was in the wake of the Civil War, directed specifically at former Confederates. There's a a surge in the last couple of weeks of lawyers and people who are saying that the secretaries of state in the various states, under that provision, have the right to remove the former president from their ballots. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to argue the legalities. I'm just going to say that is an incredibly dangerous idea because it's going to have first off, the president hasn't been found guilty of insurrection. Second off, hasn't been found guilty in any court that I'm aware of that he's given aid and comfort to enemies of the United States. So that's first off. Second off, this is the most dangerous idea I've heard. I've been, bopping around politics for 40 years now. It's the most dangerous idea I've ever heard. It's essentially disenfranchising 80 million people, and people, who I point out in the column, people who already believe their government and economic systems are working against them actively, and who, for the most part, are well armed. It is a recipe. It is almost as if you are trying to summon political violence. So I cannot describe how concerned I am about the badness of this idea.
And Democrats don't care though, right? Because they have this sheep-like voting mentality that whatever comes forward to take down Donald Trump is something that they should pursue, and then they feel as if they're doing the righteous will of the people.
Yeah, that's great insight. And a friend of mine asked me about it this morning after you read the column. He said, "What is it with these guys?" I'm like, I have no idea. I've been thinking about this. I used to work for the president in the White House. I have no idea. I mean, it's if you look at this is going to be controversial, but if you look at the governing record, he governed like a moderate Republican, except on immigration and tariffs, right? I mean, nice tax bill. Immigration was a serious victory. Good to be talking about China as the adversary they are. But other than that, he could have been Rich Nixon. So I don't understand what this is all about, and I wonder, what makes you think that, hey, we're just going to remove this guy from the ballot and that's going to solve every problem? Like, you're still going to have 80 million people in this country who want to vote for him, right? They're not going away. Trump Derangement Syndrome, right? It's a real thing.
It is a real thing. And, you try and puzzle through it and approach that problem from a logical perspective. And I think that's where we go wrong, right? Because we are dealing with people who are lunatics at this point. Look at what the Democrat Party represents anymore. Just put aside for a second their Marxist ideology, the fact that they truly believe that men can deliver babies and become girls simply by willing such just shows you the depth of their insanity.
Yeah, I'm never sure if they believe everything they say they believe, or they're just like, I don't want to get in a fight with the actual crazies. The thing about Joe Biden is he's titular head of the Democratic Party, right? I don't think he believes half the stuff he says, but he's like, why fight it, right? And that's where you get in dangerous territory, where you're like, you don't believe something, but you don't, you're not committed enough to the truth just to say that's not right. And over time, as you point out, it becomes kind of a psychosis, right? You actually start thinking, okay, that's boys and girls, same, different, gender, sign of birth isn't really what you are. Still, a lot of craziness creeps in when you stop getting in the habit of telling the truth, is I guess what I'm saying.
Right. And then you have to wonder, though, why does the madness continue? We all know it's lunatic fringe. And like you said, many on the left probably don't even believe it themselves, but they're using it as a political tool. So you have to look at who's benefiting in the end from this lunacy, and who do you see benefiting?
Yeah, I mean, that's that I kind of understand a little bit better, right? The people who benefit from this stuff are the people who want to remake our society.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
The genuine radicals who are not, the UAW guys who are on strike, right? Those guys do not want to remake our society. They just want a slightly bigger piece of the pie. Okay. I totally understand that, right? but people who want to frame the entire American experience as, hey, it's all about slavery. They want to remake the whole world. Those guys, those are the ones who benefit from the wink and the nod that moderate Democrats give to the radicals.
Yep. Which is why I think a piece that you wrote for the Washington Times back in July is even more important than the piece we just talked about. You title it "The Limits of Politics: What Happens in Your Own Home is What Matters." And then just to read one line from here, despite the fact, you wrote, that each election is sold as the most important election in the history of the Republic, none of them are. You talk about how it's the home life that matters most, which is another way of saying culture or perhaps faith.
Yeah. I think about them all together, like most people, right? Yes. If you had to diagnose what's going wrong in America in the last 50 years, it's very tempting to say, well, the government's gone wrong, but governments are lagging indicators, not leading indicators. If you really had to pick what's gone wrong in America in the last 50 years, it's been the dissolution of the American family. And that's led to all these other pathologies. All these other pathologies have crept in because of that. It is the leading indicator. And I don't think people think about that enough. And the other thing, and the reason why I wrote the column is because I kind of worry that people think, hey, we'll eventually solve we'll get the politics right and everything else will get right. But that's not actually the order of operation. Get everything else right, then the politics gets right. And I'm always concerned that the right side of the political spectrum now, I'm always concerned that the right kind of adopts the framework of the left on all kinds of different things. And the idea that there is no personal life, that everything is through the state and for the state, by the state, that's a very leftist frame on the world, right?
Yes.
It's not healthy. And it's not likely to solve the problems we're facing.
Yes, I think that hits the nail on the head, what you talk about, the importance of family structure. And I wonder if through your research and just, through your thinking on this theme, where it all went wrong in America. Because if you look back, and maybe this is looking through rosy colored lenses, right? But if you look back at like the 40s and 50s and things like that time frame, it just seems like it was all about the family, and two-parent families was the accepted traditional good thing to strive for and so forth. And it's gone so far so wrong.
Yeah, I could make a couple of different arguments about it, but I think the two that I find the most persuasive over time, and the argument that's best supported by data is, in the wake of the generation that won World War II, that came back home, I don't want to say they overindulged their children, but they overindulged their children, right? They themselves were children of the Depression, so they wanted to make sure their kids wouldn't face the same kind of things. So what they wound up with instead was kind of overindulging, and then we wound up with the 60s, especially feminism, and the sense that engagement with other people in a family unit was an optional thing, or it was it was not core to the message. It was not core to the actual prosperity the country was experiencing, right? And what we found out was, of course, as soon as families break apart, everybody suffers economically. So I don't want to blame feminism, because I think generally speaking, it's probably a social good. But if you had to point to one thing, it was that. It was the 60s. It was feminism. It was families starting to break apart. And then the other thing, you know this as well as I do, Roe v. Wade in 1973.
Yes.
Just devastated families, right?
Which is an extension of the feminism that you just talked about, right? And I think it's more the radical feminism that is problematic, the kind that says we don't need men, right?
Right. And my friend JP Gans, right, is
Yeah.
He's a longtime worker in this field, right? And what he argues pretty persuasively, to my mind, is that the crisis in fatherhood predates the crisis in religion in this country. That what happened was when fathers left the home, started to leave the homes in the late 60s and 70s. That's why we have a big problem with lack of church attendance and irreligiousness in this country. Because without the fathers, much more difficult to transmit that stuff. So it's a problem, and a lot of social ills, a lot of social pathologies flow right from it. So
I don't think that you can understate the problem on that, the breakdown of the family unit, because if you just look at the minority family statistics in this country, blacks, right, I think they lead the way with homes without fathers, with broken homes. And you look at their reliance on government and entitlement programs, and I think there's a direct correlation there, that the breakdown of family unit in America sooner than later leads to biggest government.
Yeah, well, naturally, right? I don't want to say naturally, but in a way it's natural, right?
Right.
If your family is not taking care of you, if you don't have an extended family, right? You know, you think about birth rates, right? The decline in birth rates means people have fewer nieces and nephews and cousins, so they have smaller extended families. You know, your extended family is going to take care of you. You're naturally going to look to the government to take care of you. It's despite the fact that the government really doesn't care about you at all, right? They view you as a means to an end.
And it's funny that you say naturally, and I am so quick to agree naturally, right? Because that is the obvious conclusion. But there are so many in this country who would listen to our last couple minutes conversation and think that we are radicals.
Yeah, I mean, forget who you are for a second, right? If you just look at the data, it's impossible not to conclude that this country we're living in, just so you can erase the idea it's the United States, this country we're living in has experienced pretty dramatic, radical change in the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, if I'm a radical because I think that change has been not good, yeah, I'm a radical. I'm okay with it.
As am I. I know our time's tight, so let me just wrap up with this one question going back to Trump. And you know him personally?
I worked with him, yeah. I was his number 2 guy in the Office of Legislative Affairs. So, yeah.
So going forward, first off, can you confirm whether Trump is definitely going to stay the course? He's not going to drop out based on pressures from the left on these indictments and so forth. And second off, where do you predict all this legal stuff going? Do you think that his name will be kept off the ballot successfully in some Democrat-controlled states?
Yeah. Yeah, first off, to answer the first question, right, he's a native New Yorker. I'm a native New Yorker. There's no... councils are always possible, but councils of defeat were never... councils of surrender were never accepted, right? Like, hey, we just can't do anything about that. That's never an answer, right? Or, hey, we should maybe give up on this thing. Never an answer. So, yeah, the idea that he's going to just throw his hands up and say, hey, I'm done with this stuff, that's not going to happen. The legal stuff, the regular old 91 indictments, all that other stuff. If you look at that, if you take each one as a legal thing, as a legal matter, they're each in their own way pretty weak. And I'm not sure how you would panel a jury anywhere in this country on a case involving the president, right? So I think at the end of the day, nothing happens there. The Section 3 stuff, the Section 3 disqualifications, I could see a couple of crazy secretaries of state doing that. That really worries me. I think that's a legitimate threat.
Because, as you say, it could very well lead to violence in this country, yes?
Like I said, at best case scenario, it's going to lead to civil disobedience, widespread civil disobedience. You can't just take people off the ballot and expect everybody to sit there and say, oh, okay, that seems perfectly normal and reasonable.
This country definitely has changed. You're right on that. The last 50 years, great change in this nation. Mike McKenna, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I'm a fan of your work, and I would love to chat with you again someday.
Thank you. That'd be fun. I appreciate it. And like I said, the conversation's been great.
Thank you. These are the best of times. These are the worst of times. And Democrats are doing everything they can to make them the worst of times for patriotic Americans. Thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and wherever podcasts are offered. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.